What's up, everybody? Have you ever wanted to read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius? Or maybe you're just struggling with living life, or maybe you're a very busy person in demand and you want to know how to live your best life while juggling the heavy demands of life. Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're talking about the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And surprisingly, he was a very busy man, but was able to live a very
Yeah.
good life. So we're going to be going over all of that today. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Yeah, so today, this is a good one. We've been looking forward to this for a few weeks. And
Yeah.
today we're going to be discussing the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And this is a book that I would definitely recommend everybody to read or listen to. You can find an audiobook on YouTube. It takes like 5 hours to listen to or 2 hours on double speed. So,
Yeah, it's a good
so it's
message,
one
though. It
that
is.
anybody can do.
Yeah.
Tell me, what do you think about the Meditations?
I think, okay, so the meditations, obviously Marcus Aurelius, Stoic. I think one of the things that's always interested me about this work is the fact that it's basically like his journal, essentially, right? And it is his personal reflections. And it reads just like that. Like, it's not written in a style of like, I'm presenting this to the world. It's written in the style of this is for me, right? And what's so fascinating about it, I think, is he was the emperor. I mean, of the Holy Roman Empire. This guy literally had all the power, all the wealth. He could do what so he could do anything he wanted. Yet you look at his life, and he embodied really this personal struggle with how to be a good person, what it means to be good, constantly reflecting on this, on how to live his best life, be his best self. And I mean, it's really interesting because I think it's a great demonstration that being a good person, is not easy. That we all, when we try to do this, it's a constant sort of, battle with ourselves of failing and succeeding and failing and, repetition. And, I think it's like reminding ourselves of the same things over and over again. And that's normal. It's fine. We're a work in progress. It's continuous effort it requires, that we're not just going to like make that New Year's resolution and in 20 days, boom, we're good. We're perfect. So I think that's one of the things I really like about it is the personal struggle it really sort of captures in trying to just be a good person and live a good life and figure out what the hell that means. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, you had a whole bunch of good points there, but
Boy,
the one that
damn right I
he's
did.
literally the emperor. Like, think about the most fabulously, like, he's richer than Elon Musk. Okay, he's like more famous than Biden. He has like literally everything, and
Yeah.
yet he's not focused on, okay, gonna go have an orgy with these girls, gonna be a glutton, eat all this food, gonna do all this stuff. He's like focused on how to live the good life, and it's so counter to what we believe this person would be like, where everybody's like, oh, I want to be like a billionaire so then I can go have these sick yacht parties, like, just, and all this stuff. And it's just like he's like the complete opposite. It's just kind of
Oh
mind-boggling.
yeah, it is, man. Because I think it's so funny. Like, nowadays, the I think most people really the ideal life to them is having so much money they can kind of basically like perpetually impress people and validate their existence through their wealth, right? And it's like he has this, and yet he sees it as really not that valuable. Like, that's not the thing that makes life worth living. What makes life worth living is being the best person he can be, and he lives actually a pretty humble existence as an emperor. He doesn't dress fancy, he doesn't like throw it in people's faces. He tries to interact with people in a way that's like fair and just and considered. I mean, it is. He's an example. I mean, I think for anyone to follow. And at the same time, I think it's also interesting because we see him struggle with these questions I think we all struggle with, that we've talked about so many times, I think, on this show, right? Which is like, what does it mean to be good? Like, what do I actually value? What really matters? And I think you had mentioned when we've been like, we've been looking back at this work again, preparing for this, and like it is repetitive, right? He does, he goes back to the same topics again and again and again in this book, and it's interesting because that's why it's not written. I mean, it's not written. It wasn't intentionally written for everyone, right? Because it's his reflections. And I like that you see him struggle with the same things over and over again, because I think it's such a good point to take home. That, like, trying to live a good life is hard. Trying to be a good person is not easy. And a lot of times it means returning to the same thing over and over again until we get it right, or until we figure it out, right? And not giving up, persevering through all those challenges.
Yeah, it's in the beginning, I remember he thanks somebody for, giving him a life of temperance or teaching him temperance, how not to like go into excess. And he thanked them for like, you know, being somewhat chaste early on, like not having these sexual exploits very early on. Like he was very grateful for the temperance and being able to wait. And that's such against what most people think. They're like, oh, I need this excess now, and if only I had that stuff. And it's really interesting to me how we have these examples of people who have it all. So we have like Marcus Aurelius, the Buddha. They have it all, and they basically like give up it all because that's not what it is. Like Jim Carrey says it so well. He's like, I wish everybody could have all the wealth and the fame that they imagine so they could realize that's not what it is. And it's so curious because despite these examples of people who have it all in quotations and give it all up because there's something better, everybody's like, yeah, but I still got to try it. I still got to get rich because I know it'll be different for me.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest, or maybe even one of the saddest things about, like human society, which is, these stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves culturally, like really are they're hard to see through, as being false or incorrect. It's like, even though we might even have an inkling that they are, we still are so unsure about it. We still think, no, but if I had all that money, it'd be great, right? It'd be better. That's what would make my life worthwhile. And these guys all realize that that's not the case. And I mean, you're right. We see it over and over again with these brilliant thinkers, that's not an important thing. It can be helpful. Don't get me wrong. Like having, money can be helpful, but it's you matter more. Like your character matters more, because all the money in the world isn't going to make you a good person. And in fact, if you're a bad person, if you had bad character, if you have bad traits, that's just going to amplify them thousandfold, billionfold, right? To the point where it might even destroy you. And I think we see this all the time too, where you see like, musicians who are young, who all of a sudden hit it big, and then their life just falls apart. They die at an early age, because they're indulging way too much in drugs and sex. And it's just pushing themselves way too hard. They don't have a sense of what really matters yet.
Well, okay, so great point right there. It's kind of like everybody gets caught in chasing this feeling, because there's this feeling that we want, which is usually the feeling good or pleasure, and we keep associating external things with that feeling of pleasure, and the feeling keeps getting further and further away, because like the more we exploit it, the harder it gets to get that pleasure. And he touched on there in the meditations, saying how it's kind of like an injustice to society to go after pleasures and to avoid pain, because if you do that, you don't realize the true nature of the world. And so it's kind of like he sees that. I mean, clearly being a Roman emperor, he like sees that pleasure is available. Like, I mean, I can only imagine they had these insane orgies, just these glutton fests, like insane brutal killings of people in the Colosseum. Like they had like literally the excess of everything. And this is all these people chasing pleasures. And
he was in control of it. Like, he was at the top.
Yeah, and so he could have participated in all of that. He could have led this like life of excess, just like until he just basically explodes. And yet he chose to kind of rein that in, because he saw that that's not where it is. Like if you keep chasing pleasure, it'll always be just beyond you. And if you keep avoiding pain, it'll always be with you. So he was looking for a different way.
Well, it's interesting too. I'm glad you mentioned that, because like I think one of the things that, and this is just, a reflection, but I think a lot of times what we miss is, it's easy to look at these external things as a way to validate our lives or to measure our success or whether or not we're good, because they're quantifiable easily, right? I know I have $1 million when I have $1 million. I count the dollars, right? Or I can tell when I'm famous based on, how many people go to my shows or how many people follow me or whatever, right? There is this way that we can sort of measure external things fairly easily, and other people can clearly see that. Like other people know that I have money or they know that I have fame or whatever. And so it becomes a way to sort of validate our existence. And we confuse that with a good existence or with what really has value. And I think what Marcus does so well in this book or in his reflections is by reflecting on these things very carefully over and over again, is realizing that those are false values. Those are false ideas. What really is valuable is ourselves, is personal development, figuring out, how to live the best life, being in control of ourselves. The problem is that that's actually hard to quantify, I think, especially at first. It's hard to say, like, I've hit that metric because, we might think we have it and then we make a mistake, which he comes back and back to, again, all the time throughout the work is like these same issues of dealing with people, dealing with relationships. And it's like, I think that's what makes it so hard, at least, in our own search for the good life is, trying to figure out what it is.
You're right. The personal development journey is a tough one to gauge because there's that saying, wherever you go, there you are. So like no matter where you are on it, like you could have been a beginner, you could have been an expert, but you're always there with you. And I've noticed this, that like in learning foreign languages, that I always feel like I'm just as bad as ever. Yet like other people keep telling me I get it better, but it's like I don't feel that way. I still feel like it's a struggle, like I'm terrible, like all this stuff. And it's kind of developing the skill set to be able to take a look at yourself previously, compare that with where you are now, and actually be able to see the difference. But that's not something that's easily done. That's not something that a lot of people will do.
No, and it's a lesson I think we can take away from his work, which is, the journaling part of it. I mean, the writing part of it is so important. And he gives you, I mean, in a sense, meditations gives you almost like a blueprint of how to try doing this. Like to literally sit down and start thinking about carefully and with pen and paper, these problems that you encounter daily. Like, even if it's like, I mean, I tried as much as I can because I think it's so helpful. Like when you feel depressed, why did I feel depressed today? Why did I react that way? Why did I, why was what motivated my response? Looking at, in what sense, and that dichotomy of control comes up again and again throughout the work because it's crucial for the Stoics, right? What is within my control? What's not? How did I sort of exhibit control, or how did I sort of basically forfeit it or lose it? And each time you do this, this might be basically a reflection of your failures, but because you're doing this, you're also learning. And you're also basically preparing yourself and developing the right kind of thinking so that doesn't happen in the future. But it's hard to do. It is. I mean, we all struggle with this. But he's a great
Yeah.
example of, going through it.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely touches on some of the other Stoic philosophers. He quotes Epictetus and other ones in there. Um, but one of the things that I wanted to mention was like, so we all get concerned in this whole like journey of personal development. Everybody worries, everybody frets, everybody fears,
Yeah.
and he touches on that, and he has such a good point. And I keep reminding myself of this recently. He's like, listen, it's either divine providence or it's random chance. Okay. And if it's divine providence, guess what? Completely out of your control. If it's random chance, guess what? Completely out of your control. And yet, despite those things, despite the idea that it's either divine providence or random chance, everything that happens to you in life, he says, despite that, you still have to do the best that you can. Like you still have to be a good person. You still have to be virtuous. You still have to work on yourself. And I personally, I found that like very, very inspirational because he's saying like, listen, all this stuff totally out of your control, and most people worry about all of this stuff. They're like, they want all the good things. They don't want all the bad things. And he's like, listen, all this stuff totally out of your control. All you can ever do is focus on what's in your control, which is really developing yourself.
Well, what's so good about that too is like, you're right. We focus on the things that are out of our control. And what that ends up doing is that means that we don't live our best lives. We don't even live a good life because we forget about the one thing that we can, the one area that we can influence, which is ourselves, the things that are in our control. And the fact is like, it doesn't matter why it happened. It doesn't matter why these things occur or, what the ultimate cause is. Because the fact is like I have certain things that I can do, and if I'm doing those to my utmost ability, I'm doing okay, right? I mean, I'm doing what I can. And I think that's what so many people fail to see. And also looking at me more broadly too, is like the things so many people complain about, which is like, the state of the world, the state of society, the state, whatever, like the state of their community, all these big things we worry about. None of those things are going to change unless we start changing ourselves to then change them. And it's like, even though they might seem completely out of the realm of our power as an individual, unless people start living better and being better people, none of it's going to change ever. I mean, it's like, we often attribute that quote, be the change you want to see in the world with, I think it's with Gandhi, right?
Andy?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it applies perfectly well here too, right? Which is, you need to start being the example if you want these things to come about, because it's got to start with us, right?
Well, look at what a good example he was setting. Because we
Yeah.
look at I mean, I've read a book about Rome, and it was just mind-boggling how, like, basically politics just went from politician to politician because the previous one was murdered. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it was brutal.
and just like the crazy stuff that was going on at those times. And so, like, but look at the example that he was setting by being the best person that he could be. Like, we still read his journal thousands of years later. Do we
Yeah.
read Caesar's journal? No. So, like, yeah, so it does make a difference to actually live a good life. um Now I'm curious, Danny.
Yeah.
There's one topic that I noticed that he talked about a ton, like an absolute ton, like pretty much the whole entire book he talked about this one topic. If you had to guess what that topic was, what would you say? I'm just curious.
Impermanence, the
Yeah,
fact that we
pretty much.
die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. The whole entire book, from the beginning until the end, he just keeps harping on the fact that we're going to die. Like, we're literally alive for the briefest flash of a moment. The time before we were alive was immense. The time after we're dead, immense. So, like, just constantly keeping on your mind that we're going to die. It's like the briefest flash. And what do you take from that?
No, I was gonna ask you. I mean, I think this is one of the most important insights that we really, I mean, so many people fail to even think about, because it's, look, we are alive now, we exist now, and one of the most terrifying things for anything that exists is to consider it not to consider non-existence, right? To consider the fact that we will one day not be here, right? But I think on the other hand, it's like, I notice this in the existentialists as well. This idea that, focusing on that, in a way, it seems like, on the one hand, for people, when you first think about it, that it would be terrifying. Like, you want me to really think about my death and the fact that I have such a short time, and it's all meaningless, and that, all the things that I do won't matter after I die, and that eventually none of this matters because, eventually humanity will be gone, and like all these things that seem horrible. But at the same time, it's also, you know, think about what that actually means. Like, all the things we pretend that, all these things that we get caught up in, that we stress ourselves out about, all these things that we act like really matter that don't, all these social conventions, norms, ideas, trying to be, trying to, be famous or do this or that. Like, all of it's arbitrary, all of it's a construct. And when you really look at it, when you have this limited chance, you have this one life, what are you doing with it? Are you living it in the best way? Why are you afraid of anything? Doesn't matter. Everybody's gonna die, right? Everyone. So why aren't you doing what you want to do? Why aren't you pursuing the things that you really want? Why aren't you taking chances? Why aren't you trying to be the best person you can be? And I think it really, when you think of it that way, it kind of frees you in a sense to start thinking positively about it. Because it's like,
Mm,
yeah, this is short. Yeah, none of it matters in the end. Why am I concerned
mm.
about what other people think? Why am I concerned about all this crap instead of doing what really is right for me and figuring that out? Because at the end of the day, it's the only way I can live the best life I can.
That's great. I always like to look at it how I don't I don't worry too much about being in a bad situation because I know it's not going to last that long. And
Yeah.
but also it gives me inspiration to get out of bad situations. So like a lot of people feel stuck in their life, maybe a dead end job, relationships that they don't like, they're living where they don't want, all this stuff that they add up that makes their life miserable. And they're just stuck there because they're like, I can't do anything. Like I was born here. How could I live somewhere else? My family lives around here. How could I live somewhere
Yeah.
else? Or like, I'm married. I know we've been miserable for 20 years, but I'm married. What am I going to do? Or how can I get another job? I can't learn anything. My teacher in
Yeah.
second grade told me I was stupid. So it's like
Yeah.
all it's like all this stuff. And I've always looked at it like inspiration to get out of these bad situations. Cause I'm like, my time on earth is limited
Yeah.
and like very limited. And sure, sometimes it feels like it takes forever, particularly when you're in bad situations. It feels like it lasts
Yeah.
forever, but it's limited. And so, like, I might as well at least try to achieve something that I want. And it's crazy. Like, once you start putting the intention and putting the work towards it, it's crazy
Oh
what you
yeah.
can achieve.
Oh yeah. No, no, I'm glad you mentioned it that way too. Is that I think that was one of the things on his mind too. Was like, this we, in a sense, like a lot of we want things to be the same. We want normality. We want security, right? That's also a dangerous thing. And I think it's clear that he struggled with it as well. That, we have a tendency to sort of paint a picture of the world as fixed, our situation as determined, as this is it. And we imagine all these reasons, right? Social pressures, whatever, culture, all these things, right? Family, all this stuff, all these obligations we pretend exist that bind us in this spot and make us so they can never change. And I think he struggled with that as well. And one of the things that helped him overcome this was this realization that this is a very short little moment in the reality of space time, right? This is a very short little chance that I have to do what I can. And painting myself in this box is just idiotic, right? At the end of the day, there is nothing to fear, nothing to worry about because it all ends the same for everybody. Doesn't matter what, everything changes, it all ends the same. And you're right. I think, it should motivate us to get out of these situations, to make those changes, to do things. And I think the great thing is once we start doing that, we see that it's possible. And like you said, I mean, the changes can happen so fast. But and I mean, I've experienced this so many times. I know you have, right? Even when you make those changes, you still all of a sudden you'll have days where you start thinking about that box again and how it's all, and you need to remind yourself. And you see him doing it again and again and again. I think it's such a good example and such an important thing to keep in mind. Like that, just this blip of existence.
Hmm. Absolutely. And also, it kind of helps you appreciate whatever is going on right now.
Yeah,
Because like kind of like the everybody likes roses because of their impermanence. Like they're
yeah,
beautiful for a few days and then they're gone. And it's like, well, literally your life is that way too. It's
yeah,
beautiful for however long it is and then it's gone. And you just have to like use, I guess, develop the ability to look at the beautiful parts of your life. Like we talk about this all the time, doing the small delights every
oh
night,
yeah,
just
yeah.
reflecting on the best parts of our day. And it's just kind of using the ability that we have to enjoy the beauty for the limited time that we have it.
I think with that too is not take it for granted, not take any of those small moments for granted because it's well, this is all we have. And I think part of it too is that perspective that you gain from it. That's so crucial to like being able to live your own life, being able to have control, to take control. And I think it's, when we start thinking this way and honestly do it. And I think that's why the example that he gives of writing, of reflecting on paper is so important too, because it's like learning to not take these things for granted, learning to see things are really there is real beauty, there is real value. It also helps you actually start to put things in perspective in terms of value. Like, does really like killing myself, working on the weekends really matter? Why am I doing this? Right? Like for this job that I hate, does it really make sense to like kill myself, like trying to meet these obligations that I can't meet to, these made up obligations to family or stuff that I don't even like, I don't know. What is binding you? What's keeping you stuck? And really asking questions about it. I think it can help us ask those hard questions to start changing our lives.
Hmm. Yeah. Another thing that I got from the meditations that I don't think he specifically said was that just the idea of having faith in yourself. Like
Yeah.
I got the feeling that he was like, you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can live the best life possible. You have to believe that you can do whatever needs to be done. Like I do remember him talking a little bit about how like we all have like life has its purpose, and as a creature of the earth our we have a purpose. We can
Yeah.
bear these burdens. Like I remember him saying that, but just kind of the idea of having faith in yourself that no matter what comes, you can handle it and you will handle it. And so that was something that I think was kind of an undercurrent for me, but a very important aspect of what he was talking about there.
No, I think it's really important. I think you're right. It's whether he says it directly or not, it's present just in the nature of the work itself, right? I mean, think about it. Like returning to these topics again and again, he obviously believed he could do it, right? He had that faith. Sometimes it's shaken, but you persevere through it. You keep enduring and you keep affirming it. And I think that's something we can all, it's something we should all learn, right? Which is, and I think what you were mentioning before, like when you take action, you try to make changes, you start to realize that you can do it. All of a sudden, you see growth, you see change in your life, you realize that it's possible. So, part of that faith, I think, is also built on a real foundation of experience and doing it and practicing and trying. And even when you fail, realizing that you just get up and try again. And I think that's such an important lesson to take away from this work, which is, you know, it's not going to be a perfect straight line. It's not going to be easy, but it's doable and it requires sticking with it. And it requires, dusting yourself off and going for it again. And I think, it's such an interesting and important lesson for all of us because I think so many of us, it's so easy to get in that apathetic, depressed mode, especially today. And I think it's like, maybe it's because of like, all the information, all the distractions, all the sort of examples of people that have more that are in our face that it seems so out of reach, but it only seems that way. And it's like because you haven't tried yet. And once you try, you can make it happen, I think. And that's, it's important to figure that out.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, about the apathetic, depressed people, and what I was kind of thinking, well, what would he say to it? And I would think that he would kind of talk similarly to what Martin Seligman says with the learned helplessness stuff. How like a lot of people end up getting depressed because they feel like they can't accomplish their goal. They feel like it's out of reach. And I was thinking, no, I don't know what Marcus Aurelius would say, but I was thinking that he would say like, you're gonna die, so let's just take that as a premise. You're already dead, okay? Well, since you're dead, let's at least try to accomplish that. Because what's the worst case scenario? You're dead. So let's try and improve on that. Best case scenario is maybe we can get a little bit closer to achieving that goal. And that's something that I know for me, like there were times in my life when I was depressed, and it was because I was convinced I couldn't achieve this goal that I wanted. And once I started taking steps towards that goal, it was difficult, but it was something where things opened up, because all of a sudden, even if I didn't achieve the goal, I was still getting some traction, getting a little bit closer, building momentum, that type of stuff.
No, I think, dude, I think so many times that when I look back and really think about times when I was depressed, it's that I can't dominate in my thinking, right? And that idea that there's no way I can make these changes, there's no way I can make my life better. I might as well just not even try. And I think you're right. He shows us that you have to try, that it's worth trying. And as soon as you try, like even if you don't succeed in the thing you're going after, you prove to yourself that you have control, that you have agency, that you can be effective. And that's all it takes. I think that's all it takes is that I don't have to accept this. I don't have to accept things as they are. I don't have to accept the world as it is. I have power to do some things. Those things are in my control, right? And a big thing he talks about throughout is, asking yourself, how did I respond to this? And recognizing that the way I respond is one of the most important things in my control. If I feel, if I think, if I feel jealous because, I think something happened a certain way, or I interpret something a certain way, or I feel angry, I might not be able to control the fact that I feel that way, but I do have control over how I respond to that feeling and whether I let it, destroy me, cause relationship problems, cause, basically like distract my thoughts for days or weeks, and consume them, or whether I just like, deal with it in a healthy way and move on, or directly approach it and figure out what's going on and deal with it right now so I don't have to ever worry about it again. It's all within our
It
power.
is, yeah, it's a really interesting and also like nuanced skill set, because it's
Oh
something
yeah.
that I find like as I get older, and you probably find this the same as well, like you develop these skills that you didn't have when you were younger. And it's like these are like really like very critical life skills. Like you're talking about like situations and how they impact you. So one thing that I think of is like these little things in life that sometimes you do something or or you read something and it makes you feel not good. Like
Yeah.
I'm talking about me personally. Like sometimes I'll say something as a joke, it didn't go over well. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll read something that I really didn't want to read, and all of a sudden I feel bad. And where historically I would have gotten really upset and that would have like changed the course of my whole day or week or something like that, I can start to notice, okay, I feel bad now. Now why am I feeling bad? And start to investigate that and figure out what it was that made me feel bad, and then choose to kind of let it go and be like, okay, well that's done. I can't change that.
Yeah.
So let's move forward. And I think that's something that he kind of talks about there, is like developing these skills with what's in your control in life in order to live the best possible life.
Oh yeah, and it's part of like the good and it's part of the good life and it's part of wisdom, right? It is having the ability to recognize that I might not be able to change this, but I can do this, right? And when you start to realize that, you stop saying I can't. You start saying, what can I do? Right? What's within my power? Like maybe I didn't get the job I wanted, or maybe I feel stuck in the career that I'm in. Well, I have the ability to make changes. And I have or I can say to myself, yes, it's possible to say, well, it's not fair. I can't do anything and then just be miserable. But like I have only a short time. Why am I wasting it? And I think that's the other critical thing about, thinking about our own death. The important thing too is thinking about the shortness of the time that we have. And it's a long time, but it's also short. Don't waste it, you know, miserable. Don't waste it, basically in a pity party with yourself. Start looking at, how can I actually make this good for me? How can I make this worthwhile for me? What does that look like? And what can I do? It might not all work out. That's fine. That's the world, that's reality. But if I do what I can, I shouldn't have any regrets. And I think that's such an important thing. And you're
That's
right. I think it just takes age. Age is, I think, has been so helpful, man. Oh my God. It's like so funny how like I don't know what age it was exactly, but you're right. Like there's a point at which you just realize like you stop thinking about all the stuff in the world as being so important that used to seem so important, right? Like other people's values and stuff and their opinions. God.
Yeah. But I mean, they really need to teach this stuff in school, because they never tell you that your life gets better with age.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that like when you're a senior in high school, that's the best time of your life ever. And it's
Yeah.
just not true. Like you start to, I think your 30s, you start to get a little bit wiser. And then from everything that I read, 40 to 60 is like the time.
Yeah.
Like you're the most productive, you have the best life, the best relation, and it's just like that's the time. So like really learning that it's getting better, having
We
the
don't
optimism, it's getting better. Yeah.
we fetishize young, being young. We we advertise aging as something to fight, like like
Mm-hmm.
it's something that shouldn't happen. And like when you think about it, it's absurd. And the reality is like, no one knows who they are deeply when they're a teenager. Your brain's not even fully developed. Like, give me a break. I think that's part of it. It's like, yeah, you hit your 30s, you're hitting a stride of starting to actually figure out who the hell you are and being open to asking those questions, because you start to realize that, oh my God, I need to figure out who I am. It's important. Like, none of
Mm-hmm.
this other stuff matters until I figure that out. And I think one of the things I found that was so important was like, I realized that like I need to know who I am because I want to be able to be a good friend, or I want to be able to have good relationships until I know that. Because otherwise it's just a lie. It's just fake, right? It's not really, you're not interacting with a real person. It's
Yeah.
I think it's,
That's such a good point, is knowing who you are. Like you were talking about how, we do all types of dumb stuff when we're teenagers. Like I made the biggest financial mistakes in my life when I
oh
was
God.
a teenager,
Yeah,
like going to
yeah,
university, studying something that other people wanted me to study. And like, it was because I didn't know who I was. And, I've learned a lot from that, but the the discovering who you are is very important, because then when you go after the things, they're fulfilling.
yeah,
Whereas like a lot of people get caught in the trap of going after things that other people say that they want, that society
yeah.
says they should want. And once you achieve those things, if they weren't clearly like very impactful to you, you might feel kind of empty.
Yeah. They don't matter, right? And you basically, what you've realized is that little bit of time that you had, you've just basically wasted part of it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why that thinking is so critical. I think there's so much else of this work too that's important. I know we will cover all of it, but I think, he's also talks a lot about being like, listening, being quiet, not being quick to sort of just blurt things out and to like believe that you're right. I mean, I think his book is also really, I mean, an example of this, right? This constant self-reflection, going over things that have happened, learning from them. And I think one of the great things about it is that it really is an example of a life of learning, of personal growth. And I think it's something, it's a shame more of us don't do this, actively engage in this sort of practice. And because I think we'd be happier, right? Learning about ourselves and being quiet and listening both to ourselves and to others, is just important.
Yeah, the whole notion that learning ends at school, like
Oh God.
that's absurd. Like I've learned
Yeah.
way more since I left school than I
Oh
ever
yeah.
did when I was in school. And it's crazy how like you get better at learning the more you
Oh
do it.
yeah. Yeah.
Like you remember, I mean, in high school we knew each other and we were both really good
Yeah.
students, just kind of naturally, and we were very, very lucky. But then, like, it wasn't until I got to my graduate studies in veterinary school, it wasn't until then that somebody actually taught me that you could study. Like, I just didn't
Yeah.
think it was possible. I thought you just went to class and then took the test. Like, that's just it. And
Yeah.
once I learned how to study, then I was just like, oh my goodness, this is a whole
Yeah.
new level. Like, this is crazy. And then, yeah, and then like when you can teach yourself something. Like, I
Yeah.
remember a lot of when I was working as a veterinarian, a lot of like younger people, like the nurses that I was working with, they would always like depend on a teacher to teach them. And I was like, well, you could just learn it yourself. All this stuff is online for free. And they're like, no, I need a teacher. And it's like, you can be that teacher, but they
Yeah.
just didn't kind of grasp the concept. But like learning to be able to teach yourself, that's another very, very valuable skill.
Oh, it is. And it's like, I think it's hard though, because I think, most people, what they struggle with is they're so dependent on the teacher being the one to organize the material, to present it in a way that's, that builds up, in a steady progression. But, look, not all teachers do it well anyway. And, I think what we fail to see is that, like, yes, it might seem overwhelming at first, but as soon as you get your feet wet and you start giving yourself any kind of goal, you'll start seeing that progress. And the more you know, the more you just allow yourself to explore any topic, the more you're able to effectively ask questions and understand what comes next. And you're right. I think, yeah, being able to learn on our own. I mean, there's so many things that are valuable touched on in this. And I think so much of it has to do with just that self-development, right? Being able to grow.
Yeah. Even just like being able to watch stuff at double speed. So like a lot of times when you
Yeah.
learn stuff on your own, you have to learn on the internet. And like almost all of the lectures and all of that stuff, I always watch at double speed because I comprehend it 100% at double speed. And it's
Yeah.
just like, I can't imagine wasting all of my time sitting to listen to that at single speed.
Yeah.
Like it reminds me of all those hours I spent in lecture halls in
Oh
university. I was like,
God.
wow, what a waste. Like I could have listened to that in double speed and gotten twice as much stuff done.
And it's funny. The great thing about video is you listen in double speed. You can always pause it when you need to, and you can always rewind if you have to. And like
Mhm.
that just immediately gets rid of that fear of double speed instantly.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I
Totally.
think I just a few other quick points I think are important. And again, there's so many in here, but like obviously, at the core of this book is trying to be the best person you can be. And I think part of that is integrity and honesty with oneself, being honest about, your experiences, being honest about, your role, your responsibility, being honest about like, who you are, your values, your motivations. All of this is part of growth. And they're hard questions, I think, for a lot of us to ask. But the best way to, at least personally in my experience, the best way is very similar with what he does in this work, which is journal. you know, go through and write things down in a personal way that you don't have to worry about other people looking at it. You don't have to worry about other eyes, and just try and be as open as you can with yourself about how you see yourself, how you see your experiences, what happened, why, and really start to ask yourself, what was in my control? What did I do wrong? How can I make this better next time? Because that's like really, I think, the way to start seeing things in a way that's healthy and towards your own progress.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember when we were doing the artist's way together, and in
Yeah.
that it has you do a lot of journaling, like a lot.
Yeah.
And
Time. Yeah.
I remember like I had a hang up about doing it. Like it was really, really tough. And part of it was because I was trying to stay away from like journaling about the negative stuff. Because I was thinking, I was like, if I write down the negative stuff, then it'll happen or like whatever. And you encourage me to just like let it all out. And that really unlocked a door for me because I think it allowed me to just be more honest and have more integrity with what was actually going on and just kind of get it out. And then once it was gotten out, it was kind of gotten through as well. But yeah, I would definitely encourage people to give that a whirl.
Well, it's like I think it's funny. It's like one of the things we all struggle with the most is like we hide or deny the hard things, right? Like the student loans seem overwhelming, so you just don't answer the phone and you don't open the letters, right? You a relationship problem is really on your mind and bothering you, but instead of just talking to your partner honestly and openly and saying, look, this is bothering me, this is what happened, and dealing with it, you just keep festering and letting it overtake your mind. Something happens. I mean, we do this all the time. And the reality is just making the phone call, answering it, talking to the person about how can I start to at least address these student loan problems, or talking to your partner immediately, right when it happens, getting it out of the way. You just feel better too. The weight's lifted. It's like so much of this pressure is self-imposed. And I think we miss it. We act, and then we start to act like it's like we're a victim, right? It's outside. It's these things causing it. Instead of seeing that at the end of the day, we have a role to play. We have some agency here. We have some control. And so once we start exercising it, there's usually ways to deal with it. And I think that's such a good example that he sets in this book is persevering, enduring through the hard things, and just persistently trying to just knock those things out, right? Taking care of stuff and taking care of our life.
Hmm. Yeah. So anything else on that list that you had there? Or-
I mean,
I think we're
I mean,
pretty
it's
good.
yeah, I think we're good. I would encourage everybody to read it. I think it's a great, I mean, it's a great book. And I think like there's so much in there that like you can get out of it that's like just practically valuable. Like really, it is.
Yeah, this is one of those books that would be helpful to read or listen to over and over again.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, you'll notice in it that he repeats the same topics again, and he probably
Yeah.
does that because they're important topics.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is probably the second or third time that I've been exposed to the book, but every time that I listen to it or read it, I'm always like, oh yeah, this is something that I definitely need to read again.
Yeah.
So
You know,
yeah, so I would, mhm.
oh no, I was gonna say, and on that end too, like, like I think one of the most interesting things too is it's not just what he says, but what he's doing that matters. Like, what
Mhm.
the example of it is. And I think thinking of it in those terms too can be really helpful because it can really like make you see the value he places on things, on these problems that he's dealing with. That, I think that in and of itself is important.
That's a great point because a lot of people want to be fabulously wealthy, very famous, all of this stuff. Well, it would be much better to be prepared by being exposed to the meditations before you're burdened with wealth and fame, as opposed
Yeah.
to getting your wealth and fame and then having to try and figure it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great point.
Yeah. So I think that's about it for the
Boom.
meditations from Marcus Aurelius. I hope you guys did enjoy that as much as we enjoyed it. Definitely give a listen to the book. Also, like, subscribe the podcast and also the videos on YouTube. We will be back again next week. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.